Morning, everyone. Welcome to Sustain SoCal's 8th annual Advanced Transportation event, Driving Mobility 8. This year, we decided to take 90 minutes to focus on innovation and initially looking at it and primarily looking at it from the perspective of the early stage innovator, which surround us here in Southern California. And later in the program, we'll dive into a look at innovation from a large manufacturer, Toyota, a transit authority, Orange County Transit Authority, and also a very influential agency in our region, South Coast Air Quality Management District. Thank you all very much for being here once again. My name is Scott Kitcher and I'm President and CEO of Sustain SoCal. Before we begin, two quick housekeeping issues. One, if you want to ask a question, please jot it down in the Q&A feature of the Zoom here, not in the chat section, please. Please keep the questions in the Q&A. We're going to keep the chat session sort of open for things to post like links, and eventually our agenda will be posted there for today's event. So we'll be using that for kind of more of what's going on today, questions in the Q&A section. Okay, let's kick things off this morning. This morning we're going to focus in on the innovators panel. To get that all going, let me just switch it over to our moderator for today, who is Lauren Harper, a very good friend of mine. She is the Energy Program Manager for the LA Incubator. So Lauren, please take it away.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to be here this morning and with all of our panelists. And so we're super excited to have this innovator panel and to be a part of Driving Mobility 8. So before I introduce our panelists, I just kind of want to set the stage. So there's been a number of national and local commitments in the past year to decarbonize transportation and several events around mobility. So we're also hosting one on mobility today, but taking a closer lens at what startups and what investors as well as corporate partners are doing. So in order to achieve a lot of the clean transportation and zero emissions mobility goals that governments and industries have, they're going to need to identify and scale technologies that can move goods and people without creating more carbon or more greenhouse gases. And so for that reason, our investors panel today will showcase transportation-focused startups and have a regional roundtable discussion on insights based off of opportunities and challenges that they face as early stage clean tech companies, and provide perspective to investors and corporate partners on how to support emerging technologies successfully towards commercialization. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. So we have first up, Max Pfeiffer, who is the CEO and co-founder of Maxwell Vehicles, which is working to build a circular economy by offering electric vehicle conversion kits for commercial vehicles using upcycled drivetrain components with low mileage total cost electric vehicles. Then we have Alex Exposito, who is the CEO of Circuit, who makes transportation easier, greener, and more enjoyable. They are building an on-demand last mile shuttle service for cities around the US. Using their on-demand app, fleet of electric vehicles, and a team of W-2 drivers, they have provided 3.5 million rides without charging $1 or burning an ounce of gas. Then we have Lexi Wiley, who is the head of marketing at Amply Power, who provides software and charge management services for electric vehicle fleets, optimizing time of use and demand charge pricing. Then we have Marc Anton Ducasse, who is the CEO of Netlift, who offers an online real-time intermodal carpooling and parking optimizing platform designed to offer rideshare services and help daily commuters travel easily in Canada. And then last but not least, we have Peter Lee, who is the CEO and co-founder of Irby. Irby is solving the problem of last mile goods delivery with a space-saving foldable electric scooter and trailer solution. So now that we have all our panelists here, it's great to have you guys today, and I'm super excited to kick off this conversation. So first, I'm going to start with a little bit of the heavier stuff. So we're going to look at medium and heavy duty vehicles with Max and Lexi first. So in the past year, we've seen commitments from numerous OEMs transitioning their vehicles to all electric within the next, setting commitments to transition to all electric within the next 10 to 15 years. And then we've also seen the unveiling of Governor Newsom's vision to have all medium and heavy duty trucks be all electric by, I believe it's 2045. So can you speak a little bit on what your technology hopes to achieve from this policy shift and the market transition, and then what is needed to support your company in order to achieve clean transportation visions?
Max, you want to take this one first?
Sure. Thanks, Lexi. Good morning, everybody.
Well, brief background on Maxwell and kind of what we do here. I'm in our R&D shop up here in Northern California at the moment. Behind me is one of our all-electric cargo vans next to its smaller counterpart, the Tesla Model Y, which is the drive technology behind the vehicle. So basically what we've tried to do here is create a commercial vehicle system around the best and most available technology in the electric space, which we believe is the Tesla 3Y powertrain. And so we've developed an integration system that allows us to take the Tesla battery, the Tesla drive unit, and refit it into a Ram ProMaster cargo van. And we can do this with either new vans, new powertrains, or used vans, used powertrains. Now, the benefit here is there's a whole spread of, cost and ethos. So if you want to have a really low carbon impact, really low cost electric commercial vehicle, you can choose something like the one behind us, which was built on a high mileage van and a recycled car. Or if you're, a government agency, a transit agency, and you have these mandates where you have to buy new, you can buy a new one, new van with a new powertrain in it. Now, the really interesting thing here is there's so much inertia and almost a stigma around what new has to be in order to meet these Buy America requirements, FTA, if you're a Federal Transportation Administration funding recipient, that it's basically pushing especially large fleets to purchase exclusively new products, which means we have this barrier where we can't actually use refurbished, upcycled components in large fleet deployments. And one of the reasons why we think this is important, outside of the fact that it's obviously just more carbon, it's less environmentally friendly, is it means that you're going to have to spend more money doing it. So we're kind of trying to help create the full spectrum of cost versus carbon impact with our product here. And the biggest challenges that we face, I think, are just holdovers, carryovers from the way that we've traditionally looked at products, the way that we've traditionally looked at the automotive life cycle, and trying to help people understand how that new paradigm can really usher in something that's more affordable and ready today. I mean, we're able to produce these even with global supply shortages because our supply chain is leveraging existing systems. There's really some innovative stuff happening in the space. And the whole point, I think, of the electrification movement is that we're trying to do new things. And so, as I meet, fleet operators and, policymakers and stuff, my only call to action is just, encourage innovation and encourage risk taking, because that's really what it's going to take to get this stuff pushed through, into the mainstream and quickly.
Absolutely. What about you, Lexi? I agree with Max about every time you talk to a policymaker pushing towards innovation, also funding towards innovation. What is Amply working to get towards in this transition and policy switch?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first off, good morning, and thanks to Lauren and the entire Lacey and Sustain SoCal team for hosting this event and including Amply. It's great to be here. So before I jump into the question, just a little bit more about what Amply does. So we pair intelligent charge management software, which we call Omega, which provides everything a fleet operator needs to effectively manage and optimize their EVs. We pair this with the charging as a service support model, which assumes responsibility for all charging aspects of an EV fleet from start to finish and into operations and maintenance. So this pairing really allows us to guarantee performance, making sure that both the chargers and the vehicles work when they need to work. And it also dramatically reduces upfront capital for our customers. So from our view, it's critical that we see momentum on both sides of the equation, right? From policymakers and the private sector. However, as we continue to see growth in fleet electrification, we need to see a bigger focus on really simplifying the grid complexities for fleets that are electrifying. So this includes from scheduling charging sessions to avoiding demand charges and peak electricity pricing, to handling the design and install of the actual charging depots themselves. This is critical for municipalities and businesses that need to remain focused on their core business, which is moving people like transit agencies or school districts, or moving goods like delivery fleets, or moving services. But as we're seeing early adopters that have struggled with implementation because of how complex fleet electrification is, and so Amply is laser focused on that tipping point for the transport sector, to recognize that rolling out the vehicles themselves is really just the first piece of the puzzle, but that they need to be focused on optimizing and effectively managing their energy for critical long-term success and scalability.
Awesome. So I'm gonna stay towards you, Lexi, and I'm gonna find out a little bit more about the transportation nexus. So you talked about simplifying the complexities of the grid, and I wanted to know, like, with the forecasted demand for both goods movement and people movement over the next decade, what are some key solutions and steps that you think are critical for policymakers and utilities as well as developers to consider to make sure that there's an adequate amount of electric fueling capabilities and that the grid is fully reliable even when it is a little bit stressed and pressed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing that I think utilities, policymakers, and fleets are starting to recognize and talk about is that the geographic pattern of the electricity demand and growth is sometimes, and actually not just sometimes, but often, it's uneven because the electrification of fleets has a tendency to focus on charging in depots, right? So it's not just a consistent growth across a utility service territory or even across the country, but that there is kind of these depots that are being clustered in specific areas. And so for stakeholders across the industry that are looking to ensure adequate electrical fueling capabilities, we need additional storage and distribution systems and upgrades to help manage the electrical stresses on the grid, and also storing that energy locally to smooth out those local load spikes. We'll also need more monitoring to provide grid operators awareness of demands behind the meter storage, and then of course, advanced distribution management systems to help manage increased renewables and distributed energy resources.
Awesome. And I always, in my head, I'm always like, couldn't we fix this with just like bi-directional? And I'm like, but the electric vehicles still need the charge. So then thinking in that space of the people who really make the movement happen and those that have fleets, I want to speak a little bit related to goods movement and people movement. And this is a question really for Alex, as well as Mark Anton and Peter. So related to goods movement, urban delivery and limited mobility access can generate congestion in urban spaces. And then I know that, Irby and Circuit have participated in pilots in Los Angeles, especially the zero emissions delivery zone in Santa Monica. And then NetLift has deployed their technology in Canada and France, as well as Belgium. So can you guys speak briefly about not only your company, your technology, and a little bit about what pilot deployments you've done, their impacts on the local community, and then how it's helped whatever associated partners you've been working with achieve some of their goals? And I'll let you guys decide who you want to let go first. So
let's go with Alex.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Obviously, there's been a huge surge of good movements in urban areas recently, but when you think about the overall problem, it's really congestion and single occupancy vehicles. So whether that's moving a person or a package, it's still a car on the road and it's still causing traffic. And about a third of all vehicle trips in the country are 2 miles or less. So that's where we're heavily focused at Circuit, is reducing the amount of single occupancy vehicles being used for those short trips. So that's typically getting people to ride together in shared electric transportation across town. That's also connecting people with distant parking lots, so they're not driving around in circles looking for parking. And then a big part is also connecting people with mass transit, because if you want to reduce a lot of cars on the road, getting people on a train is a great way to do that. But providing a user-friendly experience that aligns with what people have grown to like about the Lyfts and Ubers of the world, combine that with a more responsible and direct approach. So we're not going to compete with the train, but we're going to get people to the train. That can make a bigger dent. And we've been involved in a couple pilots. One was part of, as with Lacey, we've done a number of programs around the country. But in thinking, the Santa Monica delivery zone pilot was interesting because we've already had cars in the area moving people. So while volume was lower, why not have some of these cars also move packages? And I think structurally that makes a lot of sense. Have the trucks stop on the outside of the core downtown area and use pedal, foot, or electric vehicles to handle that last mile. Share a little bit more about Lemare Park too, but I don't want to hold the mic here, so I'll pass it along.
Sounds good. And then over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. And hi, everyone. Montreal here. So yeah, 100% agree with what just Alex said. We all share the same enemy, right? The congestion and the slow driving. Everybody talks about it. And from a Canadian or European perspective, public transit is so well developed and so dense in most of the city centers that it is a given that people will not try to use the car to drive only 1 or 2 miles. We discovered something lately that has completely changed the narrative on our side, is that 100% of commuters need to park, right? So if they drive to work, even if they do a longer distance, they need to park. And we discovered that the reason why people would leave the car at home is parking. They don't really care about the distance. What they really care about is to park. And when we discovered where parking was saturated, so we're talking to large hospitals who cannot work from home, we're talking to university campuses where we need to send students back, or eventually large manufacturers. Distances are long. Public transit is not usually easy to deploy, and people don't necessarily want to drive 20 to 30 miles. So the moment we discovered that, and this is what is really interesting about this pilot, is that we actually leverage parking and not distance. So we're not exactly a transportation business model, we're a real estate business model. And the sweet thing about this is that now we can control how we park on private parking lots or installations, but also on streets. In Montreal, when you carpool with NetLift, you can park on the streets and you will not get a ticket because you can prove that you were not alone, okay? So this way, public transit authorities or park and ride lots in streets very close to large employers can use our technology to basically turn the city streets into dedicated or reserved parking spots. So I'm not going to go into the details from a technology point because we use license plate reading to do this and the app, but it is very different than what we used to be doing a couple of years ago. And when we discovered that, it started to, the speed picked up very much.
Awesome. And it's interesting because when I lived in New York, carpooling was absolutely everything. And if you had a friend with a car, you were going places with this person because it made your life a little bit easier. And then I was telling my sister, we were driving down the street and I shouted in the car, I was like, oh my gosh. And she was like, what is that? And I was like, it's a circuit. I've never seen one. I was on the way down to the beach and I was like, this is insane. The parking down there is crazy. So it would be really nice to be able to go to one of the dining food restaurant areas that's there, but also be able to just take the shuttle from another place that's easier to park. So it's great to see some of the deployment happening. I haven't been to Montreal, but maybe I'll see a NetLift at some point soon. So, but regarding, I know you guys are deep into pilots, and I'm going to open this question up to everybody. Are there any pilot or potential opportunities that you're seeking in the near future related to zero emissions mobility access, or is there anything that you're trying to accomplish that could be better supported with a public-private partnership?
Well, maybe I could just start here and pass very quickly. Just to be clear, piloting something from a startup point of view is the technology is already working. We're sending invoices every month, right? Right now, the main thing is to help city officials or large organizations to adopt that. We're not talking about any risk from a technology point of view anymore. We're talking about the purchasing order or procurement risk. Okay, so we're here to help decision makers to adopt it, and this is why the Greater Los Angeles area was selected by us among other cities in the world because of the problems that was mentioned. Right, mobility in Southern California is noticeably interesting. So this is why we need to bring the right technology to fit with the right problem. I don't know about you guys if it's the same thing on your side, right?
Yeah, I think I'll add that it's been encouraging to see some of the pilot activity, because I think historically governments are quick to spend money on researching things. And a pilot is
Absolutely.
essentially a research project that's actually providing value. And so we've done some pilots that have been really successful, and I could share more about Leimert Park. I think focused on disadvantaged neighborhoods is really, and LMI neighborhoods is really interesting, because these are typically areas where air quality is the worst, EV adoption is the slowest, and commuting costs, make up a bigger portion of incomes. So that's kind of ground zero for places to start. And I think it's been exciting to see that some pilots have trended in that direction. And then using a pilot, because you can do simulations and research, all you want. One thing we've learned is that we learn a lot, that first week of starting an operation. And I think that's a lot more valuable in some cases than any research you can do offline, not on the ground.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I could follow Alex on that, I think the thing that I've found, and kind of circling back to encouraging innovation is any way that we can de-risk failure with state agencies, large companies, municipalities, is really critical. I think looking at I'm kind of from the inside perspective, looking at the EV industry space and people that have done new projects, new vehicle technologies, and I think people expect they expect perfection. They expect it to be not easy, but they're not always ready for the hurdles, especially people that work in very fiduciarily responsible businesses and organizations. So I think just saying, hey, the goal here is to take new technology and figure out how to make it work. It's not to, in a lot of cases, I think with people in fleets, they want to explore it, but they're not necessarily ready for that learning experience, or they're not necessarily ready for it to be kind of like evolving. And I think that's something that I really want to encourage people, is saying, hey, you're the first people doing this, so get ready to have to work out some kinks, because I worry, and I do see a lot of people and organizations that try something new, and then with minor hiccups or with a failure, they then say, okay, we tried, we're good, we're back to our our diesel and gas. And I've seen that a couple times, and it's really it's understandable. It's definitely understandable. And I think it's kind of the core mentality shift we're looking for, is let's get ready to fail forward, as some say.
Yeah, and I can jump in next. I touched on this earlier, but we've unfortunately seen some pilots of fleet electrification projects fail, or at least leave a bad taste in the fleet operator's mouth. And that's often because up until this point, pilots have really been focused on vehicles and the chargers, the hardware themselves, and not really kind of a comprehensive look at how to figure out electrification that can scale. And so what Amply is really hoping to see moving forward is pilot projects that look at more than just the vehicles and the chargers, but the software that connects everything, that does integrate with the utilities, demand response programs, and distributed energy resources, because all of those components are really what going to allow us to scale and see electrification in every corner of the country.
Absolutely. And I think one thing you guys all kind of touched on is the response, there's a reputation responsibility, there's a behavioral shift, there's a cultural norm that we've seen. And so, it takes, I know what is one thing I learned, it takes 21 times or 21 introductions to something to make a full habit out of it. So we've got a lot of work to do. I still need to actually get behind an electric vehicle and actually drive it. I've been able to be in one a couple of times, but one of the things I think about when I go on a walk in my neighborhood is, where would I charge this? And I think about the solution all the time. So it's very interesting, but I even am a part of the behavioral shift that is needed in order to see some of this happen. And so I can only think about, if you're in charge of a fleet and all the responsibility of making sure you get things done on time, what is needed there. So I'm gonna now move over a little bit to Max's realm with you mostly are converting a lot of medium-sized vehicles, and a lot of those are the ones that you see, the Amazon ones, the delivery ones. So I also do a lot of research at Lacey. So one of the things that I saw recently is that there's going to be a 15% growth in last mile delivery in 2021. And so the market's going to need to be able to meet that demand. And like you've said, you have fixed a lot of the supply chain issues there, because you guys are converting vehicles, not necessarily starting up from the ground and making brand new vehicles. And so I want to know, like, what are the key near-term and long-term actions that you believe are needed from the private and public sector in order to catalyze this demand? Is this like funding? Is this specific policy? Is this more opportunities to deploy? What do you think is needed there?
Oh man, there's a lot in there. So, I mean, just to preface all of this, like our supply chain stability is only really in context to like the unprecedented manufacturing space we have right now. I mean, this is, probably the worst time in the last 50 years to try to build anything hardware. And, our volumes are relatively low in comparison to, at Chrysler and Ford and Mercedes. But, relative to, the EV space, we're still able to keep getting these out. So I think the hard part is that, when I've met with large commercial fleet operators, it's all about the numbers. It's got to make sense financially, and it's got to make sense. It's almost got to be better. Like there's a whole paradigm with new technology where you want it to be at least 10x better than the predecessor for people to actually adopt it. And the thing that I've run into is, I don't think we're quite there yet with commercial EVs being 10x better than gas EVs, especially on cost. I mean, if you look at how cheap a box with wheels is to produce, and then you add a big battery to it, it's really, it's a really hard thing to grapple with. So the funding side is a little bit tricky. I guess I don't really have like a definitive answer, because I think like manufacturing and infrastructure has to catch up to it, and it has to be gradual for it not to be overwhelming. I mean, it's everything. It's, getting the vehicles and then making sure that the lots can handle the vehicles with the right charging infrastructure, making sure that they're managed correctly, so that we've seen pilot fleets where all of the vans get plugged in and then it trips the breaker and then all the vans end up dead in the next morning. Like there's things, where just the whole ecosystem has to be created, and it won't be done overnight. Rome won't be built in a day. So I think, encouraging it at all levels. There's no real easy answer to it. I think I would just, push companies and organizations to take risks. That would be kind of our biggest thing, and continued support for new technologies for the state. I mean, as of now, we don't have we don't really have support from the Air Resources Board for our product, because it's a span of new and used, and it's a risk aversion thing. So I would say pushing on at any level to say de-risk stuff and just start trying it, because that's how you'll build that whole ecosystem. Is you just have to do it. So that's kind of it's not a great answer, but
I mean, it is, because it's similar to the way that there's, the opportunity for DRs to participate in the wholesale market. And that took a really long time in order to get that agreement across all utilities of like, all right, it's okay if they play. So I think the same is true for having components that are new and some that are being reused, I think is a part of that. And I think also, speaking to your point about, the tripping the breaker, and then also how Alexia was mentioning how it's not an even distribution of new energy needs. I know one thing that we're looking at, especially when it comes to some building decarbonization, as well as like fleet operation, is getting the upgrades localized so that you can actually have that amount of demand in that location. And I work with the Community Environmental Council Santa Barbara, and they're actually working to do an assessment of electric vehicles at the Port of Hueneme. And so that's one of the biggest thing there, amongst all the different factors with the fleet managers and their needs, is figuring out how we get the electrical upgrades and what that cost is, and how that cost also impacts being able to meet the demand and make the transition. So there's a lot of factors that I think everyone needs to consider at the same time in order to really get us there. So, and then, so I guess we've got some time, but one question I know that I really wanted to ask the whole group, especially because I know that this is one thing that investors always want to know, and we've got a group of great startups here. So I want to know who's raising capital, and then if you want to provide anything about the amounts, I want to also hear from you guys on that. So, and I'll start with Lexi, since you're unmuted.
Sure. I'm actually going to be a little vague, but we are currently going into a fundraise, but unfortunately that's about all I can share. So I'll stop talking.
That is fair. Awesome. Mark Anton, Alex?
Yeah, we're preparing for another fundraise, and we should have more specifics on that closer to the end of the summer. But always happy to connect, with folks that might be interested ahead of time.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead as well with the next round in 6 to 12 months, based on the different metrics we're going to have on the international point of view. Right now, we try to keep up with we tripled since the last 7 months, so it's already pretty steep. But the point is this: we need to basically get all the metrics right from an international point of view, because there are some differences from a legislation point of view, and that will impact the velocity of the deal flow. So once we've got it right, we're going to talk to each other anyways. So yeah,
Awesome.
give us a few months.
Sounds good.
I'll be the black sheep here. We haven't raised any funding, and probably won't, at least for the near term. And that's kind of been driven by a mindset towards making the product financially sustainable. Like our goal here was to build something that we could sell and make profit on at day one, which has been the case. So we may, we kind of continually revisit it as we grow, and the whole supply chain constraint hit us at a time where we were looking to do that. So now we're kind of looking at the whole global market, kind of keeping us in a place where organic growth is possible. But for our hardware model at the moment, we're kind of trying to keep it organic, keep it sustainable, as it forces the technology to be economically viable, which is the key. One thing that happens a lot with startups, and pardon me for going long-winded on this, but especially clean tech, is they'll get subsidized by investment funding. And so the actual hard cost of the product and the economic viability isn't borne out until it's, you're already pretty deep into it. So, if you go raise $500 million and that subsidizes, the 200 vehicles that you sell in that $500 million period, your vehicles are really, really, really expensive, and that doesn't scale. So that's kind of the flip side of, doing that. And obviously there's reasons why that does make sense sometimes, but just kind of where we're coming from with our circular economy and like low cost model.
Very nice. I wouldn't say black sheep. I'd say maybe green sheep. You're trying to get the growth going. You're thinking about other things. Let's move to green sheep. I also have never seen one, so it's fine. So now I have a few more questions that I can ask, but I wanted to go ahead and open up Q&A from the audience. But while anybody who has a burning question types that into the chat, I did want to know, so Alexi, when it comes to the near and long-term decisions that utilities need to be thinking about with fleet operators, can you talk about what near-term actions that you think within the next year or long-term actions within the next 5 to 10 years that you think they need to take in order to make sure that there's charging capabilities for anything from just any electric fleet, whether that's delivery, whether that's people movement, what is needed on that scale, especially when it comes to managing their demand and their use?
Sure. And, I might answer this question in a slightly different way than you might be anticipating, but, what I am seeing, what Amply is seeing, is that there hasn't been enough collaboration between the electric utilities and fleet operators. For all of us who live in California, we've seen the California utilities kind of take a leading role in trying to understand fleet electrification and make those necessary investments. But outside of the state, that isn't necessarily the case. There's many utilities that haven't even begun the dialogue with both municipalities and with private fleets to understand what the short-term and long-term needs are for grid updates. And so that has become a big issue. It is delaying projects. It is encouraging fleets to potentially put electric vehicles in certain areas that they might not have otherwise wanted to, or maybe only make investments in a state like California rather than in the Northeast or in other places of the country. And so, instead of kind of coming up with a blueprint for near-term and long-term decisions now, I really want to see more collaboration, more working groups, so that way the utilities and the fleets are really speaking the same language and setting those goals together.
Yeah, I think also being able to export lessons learned, especially instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, try to create your own blueprint. One weird mirroring effect that I see between me living in New York and living in now Los Angeles is that sometimes they just want to build a completely different plan. And then like you guys are doing a lot of the same things and you can learn from that. And you also want to make sure that when you're deploying zero emissions mobility or you're deploying charging solutions that you want to make sure you're thinking about how the city already operates. And I know that one thing that especially Mark Anton and I talked about once was that each city is different, the commuters are different, the patterns of people are different. And I know that when it comes to deployment, you guys have to consider that with every single new, I guess, procurement bid that you get. So one thing, since I don't think that there's a question in the, oh, there is a question in the chat. So I'll actually ask this one and then I'll ask my question. So can Lexi from AmpliPower explain more about what charge management services are and what is their value and how utilities factor in there?
Sure. So our Omega charge management system is essentially software that speaks to and connects with the utilities, with telematics and fleet management tools, with the chargers and vehicles themselves, and many other inputs. And so it allows our software to, in an automated way, decide when a vehicle needs to charge based on schedules, where the vehicle might be when it's planned to come into a depot, what the demand pricing or other utility factors might be, or if there's any kind of demand response program that we can integrate. And so it takes all of these complex data points, simplifies it in the back end, and produces a simple schedule for the fleets to charge their vehicles. This also allows us to factor in things like state of charge and battery health and really optimize the vehicles for that battery health. And then, of course, long-term energy cost savings. So without Omega or without a charge management system of some sort, fleets today will bring in their vehicle, plug it in as soon as it arrives, and it might be charging at the most expensive time of the day. And so this software really allows us to kind of manage those peak demands and electricity costs to really streamline the cost of energy.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thanks to whoever reached out to ask that question. So one thing I was going to ask you all is there's a lot of, I asked this to investors. So I also like to ask it to startup companies. So there's sometimes misconceptions of like, when you work with a startup, like what that means and like how easy a project gets done or implemented or even procurement. So could you guys speak a little bit on what is the best way what partners you like to engage with and what way you like to engage with them and how you guys can work to one, deploy your technology and get things done, and then how that also works to benefit you and to build out your brand.
I guess, Lauren, your question depends on who the end customer is, right? For example, if we target a private company, an employer, or we target a city or a public transit authority, it will depend, right? And I think that the first thing I would like to say, following what we just said, we in Canada, especially in Eastern Canada, the state of Quebec, have very large clean tech funds who are extremely bully with the type of technology that all the companies have here. So I would eventually be happy to introduce you to those either investors or partners, because sometimes, for example, the hydropower company here is looking very specifically for these type of solutions, right? To expand it globally. So this is why I think this is a reciprocal way of doing business. A lot of people and companies look for what Max is doing, what Alex is doing, and obviously Lexi would have a tremendous success in Canada with this type of solution. Okay, with that being said, I think our job, put aside the startup aspect of it, let's suppose that we master the technology and the deployment. I think our job now is to educate the end customer, because companies in the US, in Los Angeles, do have targets. They do have goals to achieve with regards to the reduction of air emission, of making recruitment and retainment of human resources. We discovered that commuting is a big factor in how you keep your employees satisfied. So our job is to educate finance, human resources, to how things could be working differently. And what I hear a lot on the marketplace right now is that they do not want to wait for city officials or eventual elected officials because they deal with different time frames. We don't have 4, we don't have 10 years. To address that, we have months to actually start see results and KPIs kick in. And once we've achieved that, what we've seen is that the ball starts to roll. Now they try to copy the other hospital, they try to copy the other city, because now it's just like replicate. We tweak a few parameters, but at the end of the day, everybody wants to be the best second, not the first one, right? As he said before, taking a risk with regards to the rewards we could have is sometimes difficult. So this is why we're among friends here, nobody's listening, but I'm not talking too much about the word like innovation now, because it's scary. Like nobody wants to innovate, right? They want to have the results of the innovative stuff, but not the process. So let's put aside the fact that you could have some risk. You just have to say, yeah, give me your metrics, what you want to achieve. We're going to find out a way to deliver this. And it works, right? But this is a tricky part. I don't know about you guys if you felt the same thing, but.
I mean, I would move similar to that. I would actually kind of want to hear from Alex a little bit, since I know you've worked with multiple cities, and I know that probably working with different municipalities and different city governments has been different. So what are your best experiences? You don't have to name any names, but what are some of the ways that you've been really successful, or it's been really simplified to implement and get things on the ground?
It's varied so much by city, and I think when people say selling to cities, that's a very broad term. Sometimes we're working closely with a parking department. Other times we're working with transit agencies to help provide last mile connections. Sometimes it's the development office. There's new developments coming online, and they want to make sure that these are transit oriented developments that can get people through. I think in all of these situations, having buy-in from the community helps, whether that's local businesses, whether that's stakeholders. Being a vendor and going to speak to a city is one thing, but if you can, work with a large property developer that's trying to bring business and new housing to a unit, they're obviously going to have a lot more sway. So the other part I think that has been helpful is like anything, these are complex sales. And so it takes a while. You're not, these aren't transactional type of relationships. So you really need to listen to your customer and then design a solution that works, because there's no silver bullet and every community is different. And if you're able to deal with that longer sales cycle and that process of, customizing something to the customer, then ultimately you have a long-term customer. So, where startups, long sales cycles aren't as attractive. At the same time, long recurring revenue streams are. And so, a little delays up front leads to longer term success. And I think that's been consistent across, all the cities that we've worked with. Where the use case has changed, the relationship, I think, is similar.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And then I know that with Amply, you guys, the customers that you guys have are a little bit different. But I was like, let me see. I have, Scott, how much time do I have? I have 5 minutes left. So I'm actually going to.
Yeah, 5 minutes or so, Lauren.
All right, let me answer some questions in the Q&A, and then I will bring it back to Max and Lexi if you guys want to chime in about your customers and how you work with them and how that's best. If you want to do that now, actually, do you want to
Sure.
chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll echo my fellow panelists here, but there's, similarly, we've worked with transit agencies, for example, and so that kind of longer sales cycle and complexity definitely factors in. But, getting in early and really understanding those complexities does allow us to grow with transit agencies who are continuing to scale. And then on the private side, it's a very different ballgame where there isn't necessarily a public bid that we have to go after and deal with that long sales cycle. So we definitely work with both sides of the coin. The other thing I'll say from a partnership perspective, I think it's really critical in this world of fleet electrification that we are all partnering, that we are all realizing that it takes an ecosystem for this industry to succeed and see that scalability long term. And so Amply is a big believer in partnerships. We've partnered with companies of all sizes, from big entities like Duke Energy down to smaller demand response program operators. So definitely see a lot of benefit in developing partnerships kind of across the industry.
And then over to Max, if you wanna chime in on anything there. If not, can totally dig into questions in the Q&A.
I think it's mostly, the base has been pretty well covered. I'd say just for us, we've, kind of hit the whole spread of small, very, very small to large. And I think the key has been that wherever we go, we try to make sure that there's, some key stakeholders, people that are really invested in making it happen, to push the process through. It's always relationship building, really. It's, the B2B or business municipal type of transactions that this is, especially with a really high cost product, is kind of it's about building trust, it's about communication, and it's about working through the issues, like Alex has said, it's understanding the customer model here, and especially with commercial, it's all about customization and vocation specific features, so that's something that has to get worked in there as well. But yeah, that's kind of the gist that we've had.
Absolutely. Having a champion within the group that you're trying to work with is also really helpful, always. Okay, so got a few minutes left, so I guess this is going to be a little bit of a lightning round. So I guess for Mark Antoine, someone asked if you could explain how NetLift's solution might work with a large manufacturer or hospital or to manage their parking and carpool services.
Sure. So the first question we go with is how saturated is your location? It's impossible to build new parking spots. Sometimes it's difficult to rely based on what you're located. So we just look at the data from the commuters. Where do they live? When do they work? We build a map. And then even before we sign up anything with the customer, we have a proof point, and we say, we're going to deliver on this. This is the number of people that we could put in the carpool platform. And then we will install a few cameras, license plate reading, to make sure that people can access the location depending on the business rules that we'll decide with the employer, and that's it. Technically, in less than 8 weeks, it's up and running, and could be shorter depending on the setup. So that's it. And if the company is having, for example, a location in downtown LA without their own parking, or if it's not big enough, then we will talk to the city and say, can we use a portion of those city streets to accommodate those carpoolers? We're going to prove that you have 2, 3, 4 people per car, and this is a way to reduce the single occupancy vehicle in the area. So, I mean, it's just an optimization game that we do well.
Awesome. And then for Mark Lips, Mark, you had a question about, is there a company that installs chargers to promote the use of electric vehicles? There are a number of companies that I can think of that are Lacey portfolio companies that we work with. But if you're interested, there's a couple of companies. One is Zeal, which works to help specifically property managers install electric vehicles on site. There's also NeoCharge, who has a smart splitter solution. And then there's also SparkCharge, who has a mobile charging solution, as well as a ChargeNet station. So if you go to our Lacey website, you can see some of our startups there, including Maxwell Vehicles, Amply, as well as Circuit. So then the last question is, what should communities do to put pressure on cities to electrify municipal fleets? So I guess maybe not pressure, maybe provide some influence there. Do you want to, Alex, you want to chime in on this one?
Call them, send emails, be noisy. People, elected officials listen to their constituents, and we have seen situations where not necessarily us, but an RFP that we were interested in was the result of a lot of people liking the idea and calling the city, and then the city acted on it. So I think that's step one. And vote.
And vote, absolutely. Anyone else? Max, anything that the community could help with, or Lexi?
I mean, add chargers. I think if the infrastructure's there, people, they will come. So you build it and they will come as part of it, especially at the, the city kind of municipal level. Putting that infrastructure in, even if there's not an immediate demand for it, will help to generate it. So that's kind of one thing I'd say. And a great way to do that is, community outreach and people voicing that interest.
Yeah, I echo my panelists again here, but I think that it's really important that communities understand that the vehicles that move them, like yellow school buses moving kids from their homes to the school that they're going to, or transit buses moving throughout a city, the diesel emissions are directly in your neighborhood. And so really understanding that link between harmful emissions and public health is really critical, and I think can help encourage communities to get louder, to be noisier, and to kind of help impact and see that change across the country. Absolutely.
And having that community buy-in is also a really big part of the ecosystem. That's usually kind of the second note, but I love just getting people to call and writing letters. It's always really empowering to submit something to a public official. So with that, Scott has popped up. So I think
Lauren, before you, but I was gonna say, before you dismiss, and I think that others have a response to that question as well, but I wanted to ask one question that I always like to ask innovators, being an innovator myself, and to all of you folks, is there one specific need, or what is the biggest pain point or the need that your company has right now? I'd just like to hear about just a lightning round real quick from each of you.
I'll start since I'm already unmuted. And this might be just kind of out of left field, but something that we're talking about a lot at Amply is the need for hiring. There hasn't been a huge focus on workforce development in the clean tech space, particularly in the software space, right? We see college graduates going to tech companies like the Googles and the Ubers, but we really want to see that shift and there being more interest in going into the clean technology space and software like what Amply is offering.
Thank you. Somebody else? Mark, you want to chime in? Mark Anton?
100% what Lexi just said. We could double, but right now the main focus is it's impossible, super difficult to find the appropriate resources. And even if the wages are a bit different from a Canadian perspective, it's crazy. Yeah, definitely. Bigger picture.
Thank you. Max?
Yeah, I mean, our biggest issue, believe it or not, is actually the Air Resources Board. So it's currently not legal for us to sell certain variants of our products in California. And it's largely because it's new. Nobody's seen it before and nobody wants to stick their neck out. The ARB clean vehicle programs like HVIP have had some challenges in the past. And so the staff are not interested in taking risks. And, I think, my only call to hope is say, hey, take a risk, but if ARB and regulations in California don't want these vehicles, there's other states that will. And so that's kind of the big thing. It's just promoting regulators to take risks.
I like it. Alex?
I would say flexibility of funding. There's a lot of focus on CapEx. It's an easy, quicker win, but there's oftentimes OpEx gets overlooked. And so, city might get a grant to go buy a gas bus, but they can't get money to run an EV service where they won't have to buy a bus. They can just hire a turnkey operator. So giving municipalities more flexibility in how funds are being used would be a huge help.
Fantastic responses. Okay, Lauren, I'll turn it back to you to close things out.
Well, I want to thank everyone so much. I think we've had a great roundtable discussion and we've touched on a number of different topics, and I can see opportunity for probably collaboration between all of you guys. And it's great to also participate in the energy space. I mean, in the transportation space. As you guys know, I'm in the energy space at Lacey. So I just want to thank you all for your participation today. It's been great to have you here for this 45-minute panel, and I'm grateful for the Sustain SoCal team putting this on and having you guys here today. So thank you again. And I'll be talking to you guys soon, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Innovators, wonderful presentations. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights in the space. All right, moving on now. We're slightly behind, but no worries. I'm sure we'll catch up. So we're going to hear now from a good friend of mine, James Cast, who's the ZEV business development consultant, Toyota North America, is going to talking about fuel cell innovation and momentum. So James, would you please take it away?
Well, thank you. Can you hear me okay, Scott?
Hear you fine, thank you.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and bring up some pretty pictures in the background to help guide us through. But again, really appreciate Scott and the whole team here for the opportunity to speak a bit more today on the other zero emission technology, right? I think there's really talking about kind of this portfolio of options and just what's been happening in the hydrogen and fuel cell space recently, especially just the last year, both in terms of innovation going forward and just the general momentum around the globe really has been immense. So just want to kind of bring that perspective and dive in a bit, not just what Toyota is doing, but the broader industry has been doing as well. So as Scott mentioned, my name is James Cast, and my role really is kind of a business development manager to help growing the space for both light duty cars, heavy duty trucks, and the hydrogen infrastructure that supports all vehicles on the road running on fuel cells. So if we get the slides moving here, really it first starts with where the innovation comes from to begin with. And so this is not a brand new technology that just showed up, a few years ago, but it took now almost 30 years of development within Toyota and other companies to get to that first commercial unit in 2014, 2015. So I just wanted to highlight here that, innovation is one thing we all think about as the now, but it's also something you have to think about in a very long-term horizon sometimes for it to really start to make a dent into actual commercial space. And of course, we continue to innovate and improve upon all the technologies, which I'll go through in the future pieces here. So I want to start with really the light duty space briefly. So you see on the right is the first generation Mirai. So this is a 100% fuel cell dominant vehicle with water out the tailpipe, hydrogen stored on board for those that don't know the technology as well. And it provides about 300 miles of range and a refuel of less than 5 minutes. So that's kind of generally what the technology can offer to an end user. And now just this year, we unveiled the second generation. So now we've improved the technology, we've increased the range to over 400 miles, and we continue to make these continuous improvements generation by generation. But you also see that comes with a production scale. So before it was really a majority hand built itself, and we could do about 3,000 units per year. But we continue to innovate and automate this line, now capable of basically an order of magnitude more production scale, and that will continue to ramp up in future iterations of the technology. And you see other automakers as well, especially Hyundai, making big announcements on a very similar kind of scale rollout that Toyota has been announced as well. And here, it's not just Toyota, as I noted. So we have Hyundai and Honda also selling retail vehicles here in the United States and California, and also global markets throughout the world. But many other players are starting to jump on board from previous announcements and now growing into even new recent announcements. I think the most recent here was just earlier this year with the Jaguar Land Rover announcement getting into hydrogen fuel cells, and all these other OEMs, whether that's Daimler, GM, Audi, BMW, and the like, all with their own fuel cell developments to bring vehicles into the commercial space running on fuel cell technology so that their customers have a portfolio of options that are all zero emission technology. But now none of this goes without the infrastructure. I know we talked a lot about this from a charging aspect today, where it is a new technology and you don't just show up to a gas station and are able to fill up your car. So at least with hydrogen, the experience is actually very similar to a gasoline vehicle. In fact, many of them are co-located at gasoline stations because the flow, the timing it takes to fuel is so similar. But you see here, we have about 50 stations that are in California today. But that's starting to grow now based on recent funding bucket from the California Energy Commission to 100 additional stations, more than 100 additional stations over the next 5 years. So again, starting to see this continued kind of growth and key players here listed with Iwatani, Shell, and First Element Fuel that are moving from these kind of single fueling position, smaller capacity stations into 2 to 3 fueling positions, much larger capacity and higher reliability stations. So the innovation is not just on the vehicle side, but very much on the infrastructure and hydrogen delivery side as well. So now let me shift to the heavy duty space. And you can see, we'll actually get to the picture behind me in a second as well. But really we're showing here, again, how scalable and modular the technology is. So you can actually see fuel cell iterations for something as small as charging your phone. You can actually buy these on Amazon to literally charge your phone with a little hydrogen fuel cell, all the way up to something like a Class 8 truck on the road, which you see here. And the interesting piece is the guts of the technology actually comes from our light duty Mirai. So we actually literally physically disassembled 2 units to build the first truck there in blue and then the second prototype there in red to just showcase how we could leverage all that existing know-how of that technology and put it into a full Class 8 truck platform. So that's really what we demonstrated about 3 or 4 years ago now, and are starting to work more closely with actual truck OEMs like Kenworth and Hino to get that into their full integration platforms. So within these 10 trucks that are coming online actually right now, we'll be developing in retail service for 4 unique operators, including UPS, and actually have a network of 5 hydrogen fueling stations to support them here in the ports of LA and Long Beach, which you see the picture here is the location. So here to kind of see a bit of a vertigo, there's two of the same picture, I think, on the screen now. But this was really hot off the press just about a week and a half ago, where we unveiled the first 5 of these trucks, and you see one of the Shell stations there dedicated for heavy duty fueling. So the next 5 will also be coming on the line in just the next couple months to retail customers, but they're being built and commissioned now. And we definitely look forward to getting more data and on-road zero emission trucks on the road here in the ports of LA, Long Beach. I also want to highlight too some unique innovation on the hydrogen production side. And so this slide here highlights what we like to call tri-generation technology, which is actually based on a stationary fuel cell, but the input is a 100% renewable biogas that comes from the pipeline. So with this 100% renewable source, we can co-generate 3 sources, and that's renewable electricity, about 2.3 megawatts of it. The hydrogen production itself, about 1.2 tons per day of hydrogen, all 100% renewable, and also hot water, all three kind of key resources. So when it's all complete here in the parts of 2022, we will be able to offset the entire usage of our logistics facility where all of the vehicles arrive from Japan. And we will actually fuel every new Mirai before it goes to a dealer with 100% renewable hydrogen, and also fuel a number of these trucks at a station on site as well, also with 100% renewable hydrogen. So just to, I know we talk a lot about kind of the gray steam methane reforming from natural gas. We talk a lot about the opposite side of the spectrum, 100% of renewable electricity and electrolysis, making green hydrogen that way. But using bioresources is another source of green hydrogen, which we're looking to demonstrate specifically. So the last kind of pieces on the truck side, so we've been talking about based on the first generation fuel cell technology, but we're continuing to push and innovate, moving into the second generation fuel cell stacks into these prototype trucks. So you see here, just late last year, we actually announced the additional round of prototype trucks going towards production intent and working much more closely with the Kenworth team to bring a really commercial ready product here in the coming years. So stay tuned for more of these trucks coming on the line, being beyond just kind of those initial prototypes that we're showcasing today. And a similar announcement with the Hino truck company. So now we have 2 key partners moving forward to this next iteration of the technology and continuing to develop and improve beyond those initial discussions that we've had. But it's not just Toyota. So just on the light duty side, we have many other OEMs, just even within the last couple of years, whether that's existing OEMs like Cummins from the powertrain perspective, or Volvo, Daimler, Hyundai as well, or startup companies like the Nikola and Hyzons of the world. So many different key partners here coming together to develop what they see as a key technology solution, especially for the truck space and even the Class 8 heavy duty space. And this is a global movement as well. So not just in the US, but especially in markets like Europe, China, and Korea, demonstrating trucks. The last other piece here I want to highlight on heavy duty is really the collaborative nature of the industry. So what we see today from the light duty perspective is on the cars is that every station is compatible with every vehicle and vice versa. So in that sense, every single build out of the infrastructure development can benefit all customers, and then all customers can use all those stations in the same way. So as opposed to having kind of a unique system that you can leverage, all investments help everybody. And we're looking to do the exact same thing for heavy duty, where we're pushing the envelope on fueling speed. So if we can keep getting closer and closer to a diesel parity fueling time, targeting that 10 to 15 minute range, even for the Class 8 heavy duty trucks that hold, potentially 100 kilograms of hydrogen on board in the future. And we continue to push the envelope beyond heavy duty. So you'll note here again, showcasing the modularity, and you see those 2 pictures in the middle are actually those modular fuel cell stacks, again, based on that same technology, but just 2 specific modularized packages. And we're already showcasing and demonstrating how that can be used for medium duty, buses, stationary power, vessels on marine. So you just see all these different applications, all utilizing Toyota fuel cell technology to decarbonize really any mobility solution that you have there. And that doesn't just stop with Toyota, of course. So here's another few pictures, everything from planes, trains, ships, you name it. There's been announcements to bring and utilize fuel cell technology to decarbonize all kinds of freight movement especially, but in really any mobility or stationary application. Last couple of slides here, I just want to highlight really that this again continues to go beyond just light duty, heavy duty mobility, but even decarbonizing the industrial sector. So from power generation to decarbonizing all kinds of industrial uses. This was actually a report put out by the Hydrogen Council, which has now grown to over 100 companies throughout the world, all at the CEO level dedicated to developing hydrogen and fuel cell technology. So it continues to grow and expand in what we can utilize the technology for. An interesting snapshot here, just to give everybody a sense of the global scale. You kind of see the key markets in Europe, Japan, Korea, and the US for where this network has now grown to about 550 total hydrogen stations throughout the world, supporting over 31,000 vehicles, both light duty trucks and cars. So you see, again, this just continues to grow. It's expanding to new markets. You see Australia is even starting to grow as well, but we continue to push the envelope and getting to scale throughout the world with the technology. And my last slide is pretty simple because I can't speak to everything today. I know I'm trying to go fairly quickly, but just the amount of announcements that have been made to date, just in the last year, for megawatt, gigawatt scale hydrogen production throughout the world, or this carbon neutrality push for all these key countries. I basically could not note everything, so I just wanted to note just how at scale hydrogen is growing and how much momentum has been over the last year. So with that, I think I've used about 10 minutes here, Scott, and welcome to take any questions that we may have.
James, fantastic overview. We've known each other now, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, and we've been talking about hydrogen and its integrations for that whole duration. But I've never seen sort of the hype behind hydrogen right now. The last year or so, it's almost hard to pick up any kind of magazine or read on my streaming publications about that's got hydrogen included in there. I'm just wondering why you think why now? I mean, why is all this momentum coming now?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question, right? So I think, a lot of people talk about fuel cells and hydrogen having a number of false starts, where it's always the technology of the future and will always be the technology of the future. And I think what we're starting to see today is just a general global shift in a lot of things, where the writing is becoming much more clear that climate change, carbon neutrality and such is a must in not just certain sectors, but every sector. And so the value that hydrogen brings to really all areas, as I noted, it's industrial, it's mobility, and just the value it adds at scale and larger technologies. Because as you keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, hydrogen gets better, more reliable, more cost effective. And as more people start to do some more math and strategies, they realize that being part of the portfolio is so key. And as soon as a couple of big names like the Shells and Chevrons and others of the world start to get on board and transition their business, just like the automakers, it's kind of a tipping point where everybody's on board and it just starts to make a lot of sense.
Yes, agreed. And we've had many of those folks representing those companies you mentioned speak at our events recently, and everybody's saying the same thing, which is very intriguing and interesting. Real quick, we're almost at the end of our time here, James, but technical challenges. I know you guys, there are technical challenges. And then also, what is it going to take to get to scale? Two big questions. If you can answer it in a minute or so, that'd be great.
I'll see what I can do. No, I think I can. So really, it's interesting from the technical perspective. That's not necessarily the major hurdle. We're not actually looking for that breakthrough to let this all go, but there's always things that we can do to improve. And I think one of the biggest ones from the vehicle side is hydrogen storage, right? Being the lightest gas that we have, clearly that's been done and been shipped around for decades on the industrial side, but we could definitely innovate on better ways to store hydrogen, distribute hydrogen, and really just improve the supply chain. So that's definitely one on the vehicle side. On the station side, it's just getting reliability, getting that compressor reliability up, and just generally keeping these things online so they can support customers is still a big R&D exercise as well. So technically, those are the big ones. And I think getting to scale really just requires thinking big. Again, hydrogen works when you think big. And what this requires is collaboration. So we could say, yes, we're just going to slowly build out cars and stations are slowly going to keep growing, but you really need this step change. But to do that, you have to have mutual alignment and commitments that the stations are going to be there and the cars are going to be there synonymously. Because if you have a misalignment or missyncing there, that's when you have issues one way or the other. So collaboration is key.
Collaboration is key. And then, incentives have come a long way in the last year, as has, we've seen a reduction in the price of production of hydrogen.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the policy push and, whether it's mandates and the incentives and the growth and really that push that direction, especially in the freight movement, it's already a tight margin business, and spending any additional dollar from a TCO perspective is a major challenge. So like any new technology, it does cost more today and it will for some time. So the role of policy is extremely instrumental in that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, James, once again, thank you so much for being a part of this event. I mean, you've been a great partner with us for, I don't know, like I say 6 or 7 years, and thank you again for joining us.
I really appreciate it, Scott, and I'm glad I could join today and add the hydrogen flavor to the discussion. So thank you so much.
Always a welcome flavor. Thank you again. So now we're going to turn our attention to the Orange County Transit Authority's innovation. We're very fortunate here. Those of us who live in Orange County have a transit authority that is that likes to test the boundaries and experiment and look at different technologies to make everything cleaner and greener. So joining us today from OC Transit Authority are Cliff Thorne, Director of Maintenance and Motor Services, OC Transit Authority, of course, and Dale Withers, Department Manager of Maintenance. So with that, I'm not sure, Cliff or Dale, who wants to kind of lead things off with this overview of the brief intro to OC Transit Authority's battery electric buses pilot.
Sure. Good morning, Scott. Let me bring up my screen here and share it. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I can't see myself, so we'll just play it by ear. As long as you can see my first slide there. So thank you for the introduction, Scott. And as many of you recall, OCTA has come to many of these, if not all of the mobility driving mobility webinars. We know we've come to you with our near zero engines, our hydrogen fuel cell project, and now today I'd like to just give you a brief update on our battery electric buses. Here we go. So OCTA is committed to transitioning its entire fleet to zero emission by 2040. But there's a lot to consider when you're talking about zero emission technology. With hydrogen and battery electric, there's total cost of ownership, there's infrastructure, there's range, of course, in each technology. So the approach that we've taken is to initiate a pilot program to test both technologies. So if you remember, I think last year or the year before, I think I was here and I presented on the hydrogen fuel cell electric buses, and we deployed those February 2020 is when they actually went into service. And those are out on the road. That's a picture on the right of those vehicles. And next we'll be deploying battery electric buses. Just to give you an idea of the scope of our fleet that will be converted to zero emission, it's 508 fixed route buses. And right now they're currently 100% CNG. Well, about 25% of them are near zero engines, but by the end of 2023, every CNG bus that we have will be converted to a near zero engine, which is 10 times cleaner than the current engine. So that's something we are very proud of. And then we have 248 paratransit buses. Those are cutaway. Now, currently they're gasoline vehicles, but we see a lot of cutaway vans and regular vans coming to market. So as soon as those really develop, we'll start testing those as well. So we're looking forward to that. In terms of the battery electric bus, it'll be 10 plug-in buses, so they'll be depot charging. They're built on the New Flyer Excelsior platform, which we're very fortunate because our hydrogen buses are on the same platform, and so are the CNGs. So we'll have these three technologies running side by side to really compare the difference between the propulsion systems. Since the glider portion of it will be identical. This vehicle will have 438 kilowatts of battery storage, which comes out to about 200-mile range. So that's a max range. So we probably would be operating around the 150-mile range in terms of scheduling it for service. The first two pilot buses will be arriving in September. So we're really looking forward to that. The remaining vehicles will be here by March of 2022. The depot charges, now I have to tell you that this picture is not the chargers that we'll be getting, but they look really cool, so I thought I would put those in there. Anyways, the depot charging will be ABB chargers. They're 150 kilowatt capacity. And these are kind of like fast chargers for our buses. They'll be able to charge from 0 to 100 in less than 4 hours. And what that means for us is that we could send out the bus in the morning during the peak when people are going to work, people are going to school, bring the bus back in around 10 in the morning. So from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., we'd be able to fully charge the bus and then send it back out in the afternoon for peak afternoon service. So we think that that'll really work well with our route system. And the infrastructure, we're partnering with Southern California Edison. They have their Charge Ready transport program. They'll be providing all the additional power that we need to run to these chargers. And then finally, I just wanted to share with all of you our zero emission bus purchase outlook. As you can see, we're still quite a ways out, and I kind of think that we're very fortunate that we have this, that our replacement schedule is so far out, because it really gives us a good maybe 9 years to test these before we start procuring for the next larger fleet. You can see 157 buses in 2033, but we'll start procurement on those in 2031. So by then, I think we'll have the technical and operational experience to really understand which technology is good. And I think that everyone agrees at OCTA that we think it's gonna be a mix of the technology, but depending on how much the battery technology develops over the next 9 years, we'll kind of tip the scale as to what that percentage would be. Our rollout plan, that was required by the California Air Resources Board, it looks like more than 95% hydrogen right now, and that's because we're looking at a 1-for-1 replacement. We're trying not to buy more than one bus to replace one CNG bus, right? So, but we could also look at making some route changes, just like the one I explained. Send it out in the morning, bring it in, charge it, send it out in the afternoon. Would really help us to implement more electric buses. So we'll see where that ends up, but I think that we're on our way. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to share with you that we're branding our buses with this leaf on the corner that you see, zero emission for a healthy community. So if you see this logo on one of our buses, it's either going to be electric or it's going to be hydrogen. And then we have another logo that'll say near zero for the buses that have the near zero engine. And in addition, we've purchased 40 all-electric Chevy Bolts that our bus operators will use to relieve other operators in service. That was previously a CNG fleet. So we continue to look for ways that we can reduce our carbon footprint. And I think that there's lots of opportunities coming up. So we're really excited about implementing more. So with that, Scott, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, Cliff, thank you very much. Love the innovation, love the sort of dynamics of testing out different technologies. And regarding the electric buses, though, and talking about the charging, and you've got this potential of changing the routes to kind of accommodate charging. It seems to me that you've got to kind of, if you've charged between, say 10 and 2, and then maybe after 9, you're going to be avoiding some of the peak charging times. Is that part of the strategy?
Exactly. Yeah, we're finding now that electricity rates seem to be less in the afternoon. In the past, it was avoid the middle of the day, but with so much wind and solar energy coming in, Edison has advised us that really you want to try to charge in the middle of the day. So that will be part of our charging strategy.
Yeah,
and
just
it'll be the
really
same for the
avoiding that
cars as
4 to
well.
9 period, right?
Excuse me?
Just avoiding that 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. for the most part, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, the super peak, right?
Yeah, well, that's great. And so what about, looking at the technologies, I know it's early now and you're going to be assessing it over a period of time. And it sounds to me like you're going to be going mostly hydrogen in this one-to-one change out that you've been talking about. But do you have a general sense in terms of interest level as to, hydrogen versus electric? Is RNG still part of the discussion, or are we guys looking at just total transition over to the fuel cell and the electric?
Well, we are using renewable natural gas now. So we are doing everything we can to use the fuel that has the least carbon footprint, right? Our hydrogen fuel is 30% renewable. So Even with the electric, we'll be looking for renewable sources. But it's too early, I think, to say right now. The buses have only been in service for a year, but I can tell you that the hydrogen is very promising. Prior to these 10 buses, we did a demonstration with an El Dorado bus, and we ran that for 2 years. And the first year was, availability was a little low, but by the second year, we had anywhere between 80 and 100% availability. That's one of the measurements we use for how reliable the equipment is, if it's available for service. And we were very impressed with the, how little maintenance you had to perform to keep the vehicle going. And the same is going to be true for the electric vehicles, right? And so we think when we look at the total cost of ownership, it's the maintenance cost that's going to kind of be the equalizer, if you will. There's a big capital cost up front, but the maintenance cost would kind of help alleviate that. But operating these vehicles over the next 9 or so years would really help us to understand, where those costs lie. Because right now we just have a sense of what's going to be needed, but we don't have that actual experience. So we're very fortunate to have this time period to test both technologies.
As are we, and thank you for that. And Sustain SoCal for its part is looking forward to walking this path with you and collaborating and being of any help that we can. And thank you for your ongoing participation and support.
Yeah, and thank you, Scott, for inviting us here. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dale. We'll talk to you guys again soon. Thanks again. All right, so we're shifting gears now to look at a discussion with the South Coast Air Quality Management District. Ian McMillan is the Assistant Deputy Executive Officer of Planning, Rural Development, and Area Resource Division at the South Coast AQMD. And Ian's going to be hitting on a maybe lesser known area, but very, very important air quality initiative at the district. So South Coast, it's a regulatory innovation where the warehouse rule that Ian is going to tell you about. Love my smoothness there. Sorry, Ian, take it away before I destroy myself here. Thank you.
Well, no, Scott, thank you very much. And I appreciate being able to hear all the previous speakers. A lot of really, really interesting work happening there. So it's great to hear. I want to just kind of follow up, talk a little bit about what our agency is doing. And notwithstanding some of the comments earlier, this is our attempt at innovation where we are really trying to address some of our air quality challenges. So I'll go ahead and move to my next slide here. So just really quick, first, who is South Coast AQMD, the Air Quality Management District? We are the air pollution control agency for the kind of greater Los Angeles metropolitan Inland Empire, Orange County region. A little bit more than 17 million people in our jurisdiction. If we were a state, we'd be the 5th largest state. So we're a pretty big area. Mainly we focus on permitted sources. We're an air permitting agency. So you think of refineries, gas stations, power plants, that sort of thing. We issue permits for that. But when we look at our air quality challenges, really it's kind of that goods movement. It's, when we think about air quality, we're really thinking more about smog, right? And those local pollutants also that affect local communities. Climate is a really big concern, but our agency's focus really is on kind of that near source impact of smog and local pollutants. And so when we look at those pollutants, it's really, over half of it really comes from goods movement sector. Our ports are, the biggest port complex in the country. We see all the trucks, we see all the warehousing in the Inland Empire. There's a lot of activity there. That's a huge economic engine for our region, but also a large source of emissions. Our area is also home to 2/3 of California's environmental justice population that lives here in South Coast, and they're disproportionately affected by air pollution. And it's another key challenge that we're trying to address. Just really briefly looking at sort of kind of what, some of the background. Ozone really is one of those main pollutants we look at. This chart on the screen is showing how ozone has come down through the decades. Anybody who's been here a long time knows that there's been some remarkable improvements in air quality. It's really, in my mind, one of the great success stories actually of government and public policy over the decades of improving air quality in Southern California. It's really quite amazing, the partnerships that have happened with industry, with communities, with government to really improve our air quality. But we've hit a little bit of a plateau, honestly, and we still have more to go. We see the dashed lines as those federal standards we have to meet. Actually, we're required by law to meet those standards, or we'll face some pretty significant federal sanctions. And so we're really trying to work through, what are those ways to get those additional reductions that we need. And this warehouse rule is one of those many pieces that can help in that space. Thinking about this industry, warehouses really are unique when it comes to a regulated entity for an agency like ours. We're used to, kind of the entity that owns a property is the same entity that operates all of the equipment and operates the business. It's kind of one entity. Whereas with warehouses, what you typically have is the warehouse owner is not the same as the warehouse operator who does those day-to-day operations. They're often not the same as the goods owner, and they're often not the same as the trucking company. But the emissions, when we think about warehouses, largely comes from the trucks. There's a few other sources, but it largely comes from trucks. And you look at what authority agencies like ourselves, like EPA, like CARB has. It's really the different authorities and these different bubbles, and these bubbles overlap on different warehouses. And so one of the good aspects to this, and thinking about innovation, is anytime you have a connection there between a different company, there's business opportunity, right? And there's a lot of different business models that exist and are emerging and developing in these relationships amongst these different entities. And so we think that one of the things we really try to do with this regulation is to find ways that can allow and facilitate those new business models to get these cleaner technologies out there, because we know that that's another piece that is needed. Bit of a complicated slide, but trying to put this proposed regulation all into one slide here. So this is our warehouse indirect source rule. Really briefly, it applies to warehouses that are greater than 100,000 square feet in size. There's about 3,000 of those in our jurisdiction. So quite a few. Most of the rule applies to the warehouse operator, kind of the day-to-day operations, with some limited reporting requirements for the owners as well. The gist of the rule is that it's a menu-based point system, which is very similar to LEED for building design, which I think most folks are familiar with. There's a menu with a whole series of actions on the menu, a certain number of points associated with every action, and then warehouse operators will pick and choose off the menu however they want to earn a certain number of points. And every year, warehouse operators would need to earn a certain number of points based on the number of truck trips that they have to their facility. I'll go a little bit more into that menu in a little bit. There's a few other options to earn points. One is an optional mitigation fee. If they don't want to, the warehouse operator just doesn't want to do anything off the menu, it just doesn't make sense to them, or they need to earn some supplemental points, they can pay a mitigation fee, and that will be used to fund projects in communities near the warehouses that paid the fee. There's also an option to do a custom site-specific plan. That would be for off-menu items, so opportunities for some innovation there. This program is not a large crediting trading sort of program. This is more really focused on what can warehouses do at their facility. But there is some options for limited transferring and banking of points. So if there's over-compliance, a facility might want to, we've heard from some warehouse operators saying, look, if I want to do this, I don't want a nickel and dime every year. I want to go big, right? It makes sense to go at scale. So this allows them to go at scale, do something early on, bank those points, and then use them in future years. There is some limited reporting required with this rule as well, just to hear a little bit more about what the operations are and how the facilities are complying. The rule does have a phase-in schedule that it will be phased in over a 5-year period, with the largest facilities having to comply first, the largest facilities being 250,000 square feet and above. This is the menu itself. I'm not going to go into the fine print here, but there's just under 3 dozen options for earning points in the menu. Everything that we've seen here it is commercially available today, with a few limited exceptions where things are rolling out. And I think most folks know the state of technology that if we look at, for example, these zero emission Class 8 trucks, everybody wants them. Our agency has actually done some really significant funding projects to get these on the road. What's shown here is from a project with Volvo, the Volvo Lights project. What we see is that this is going to take some time to scale. I think we all recognize that. We're open to any sort of technology in this space, though, whether it's electric or hydrogen. Both can earn points. But we also see that if we're looking at, thinking about these larger trucks, these Class 8s, natural gas near zero trucks, you heard about near zero from OCTA. Near zero natural gas trucks are available today. Our agency has funded many of these trucks that are on the road operating in commercial service and are a good option, 90% cleaner at least to their diesel counterparts. Charging infrastructure, we know that that's certainly available today. Zero emission yard trucks, those are available. Near zero emission yard trucks are also an option to earn points. And so these are, technologies that can work today. Solar panels, of course, everybody knows that solar panels are a well-developed technology, and warehouses have been implementing this on their own already. I just want to touch really briefly on this mitigation program. And so this would be funded by those optional mitigation fees that warehouse operators would pay. The idea here is that the funds would have to go back to the same geographic area where the warehouse paid the fee. So what's shown on a map, it's a little bit of a messy map. It's an aerial photo of the main part of our region. Every little dot there shows a warehouse that's covered by the rule. The yellow lines show where the funds would be pooled, and then sort of directing funds back into those areas, really focusing on near zero and zero emission trucks and zero emission charging and fueling infrastructure. And trying to make sure that we're really kind of turning that money right back around into actions that can really help the regulated entities comply in future years, right? Finally, kind of thinking about what are some of the results of this rule. Certainly there's going to be costs. Any regulation we know has costs. When we look at kind of a typical operating profile of cost for a warehouse, this rule would add somewhere around 0.5% to maybe 3% for a typical warehouse as far as their costs. But warehousing in Southern California is incredibly competitive, very, very low vacancy rates, and that's it's actually gotten worse during the pandemic. There's a lot more goods and movement going on now. A lot more. Everybody's ordering and getting deliveries to home, but that was a long-term trend that's been continuing now for at least a decade. Rents have been increasing dramatically, so these costs we think are certainly something that the industry has experienced and can bear. We think that if it's going to be passed on to consumers, there is a cost, but we don't think it's going to be exorbitant. It's something that is an important cost to think about when looking in particular at the public health benefits. And what we've seen is that if we look at those monetized public health benefits from things like premature deaths that are avoided asthma attacks, lost work days, et cetera, a lot of other health impacts there that can be avoided, it's about a 3-to-1 ratio that you get. The benefits outweigh the costs on about a 3-to-1 relationship. And really what we've seen is that that's focused more in those environmental justice communities, that it's really helping those communities the most. So this is really kind of the main reason driving this kind of rulemaking. A whole variety of compliance milestones here. I'm not going to go into the details, but the first compliance year will be 2022, calendar year 2022, with reporting into 2023. There's some earlier milestones there for some limited reporting as well, and just informational reports. One of the things that we're working on now, just to kind of wrap up here, we have a whole variety of different communication channels we're trying to develop and to make sure we're getting the word out, letting everybody know what's going on. We'll have a lot of this available on our website and kind of a lot of different tools. I'm not going to go through it all here, but just suffice it to say, if you are interested, we have an email sign up shown there on the bottom of the screen. We have a hotline set up that goes directly to the regulatory staff to help. Really, we're really focused more right now on that kind of consultation and really helping entities understand what this regulation is. It just passed in May. The same thing, that single point of contact for the email and the website that will be up very shortly with a lot of guidance documents, materials, et cetera. And with that, trying to be mindful of time, I'll go ahead and end my presentation.
Super innovative, Ian. Thank you so much. A quick question here on chat. Any way to get a list of areas where a building can achieve points?
List of areas where like a list of projects that they can do?
I would imagine projects, yeah.
Yeah, so that's in the menu in the rule itself. I showed an example from the slide. It's acquiring or using near zero or zero emission trucks, acquiring or using charging or fueling infrastructure for zero emissions, yard trucks, solar panels, and installing filters for nearby sensitive land uses like daycares and schools, if that makes sense. If there's innovative solutions, somebody builds a better mousetrap, they can do a custom site-specific plan. We're certainly open to that. We've heard some good ideas there, but that's really what the focus is, and really focusing on what are things that can reduce emissions associated with warehouses.
Great, yeah. So I think specific questions like that could probably be found on the website. This aqmd.gov/WARE, right?
WAIRE.
WAIRE.
Sorry, branding from government, warehouse
Yes,
actions and
where-
investments to reduce emissions.
Very good. So, I love the innovation behind this. Are there other areas beyond South Coast AQMD that are practicing this or trying to implement this?
So far, we're the first. This is kind of the first time we've seen a regulation try to do this. And we've seen a lot of goals that are out there, a lot of air quality goals, climate goals. And this is one of the first attempts to really try to, put it into a regulatory context at a facility level. Most regulation is focused more on the vehicles or specific aspects, but thinking on that facility level. So we know that we've heard a lot of interest throughout the nation. Honestly, different, governments have been contacting us up and down California as well. We know that people are paying attention, but this is certainly the first one, and it's not a one size fits all. It would have to be tailored to every region, as we heard from a lot of the innovators in the beginning.
Yeah. That's great. Showing, that's proof of concept. And again, Sustain SoCal would love to give some help if we can. And a question on funding from the mitigation program. When do you think that will become available? And then who can apply?
Yeah. The funding, we don't imagine that we're going to be getting much funding in from the mitigation fees until probably early 2023 is when we would first see the funding come in. And then we would be doing annual funding cycles. So probably later in 2023 is when we would first open up funding. And really anybody could apply. But again, it's, the projects would be focused more on those, how do you get those emissions reduced from warehouses and trucks going to warehouses. And so anybody could apply. We'll have a public process as we go through all of that to make sure we get the word out and to help craft the program. One of the things that we also see is that there's existing funding programs that we administer. We do about $200 million a year in funding from our agency. CARB obviously is in the space, Energy Commission, others are in the space of funding. But one of the benefits of having a new funding program like this is we can also be innovative there. And we'd like to see, are there some things that we can do, take some lessons learned on those funding programs that currently exist, but can we innovate on that and make it more effective? And so we'd love to hear some ideas from anybody on ways that we can really try to make those programs work better.
Well, that's great. I think that's maybe a good way to close. If any of our viewers today have some thoughts or suggestions, we'd love to hear them here at Sustain SoCal or Ian at AQMD. And Ian, as I mentioned to you, let us help you walk the path. And if we can be of service in getting the word out or spreading the word, or as you kind of develop the innovation behind the innovation, we'd be happy to kind of continue on with lunch and learns or whatever might be helpful to continue this message. So with that, Ian, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure. Once again, thank you for the participation and the support.
Great, thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes Driving Mobility 8, the focus on innovation. And thank you very much for joining us today. Any follow-up questions, please send them our way. It's info@sustainsocal.org. And a lot of the information that is here today is also on our site. We have a regular working group in mobility that meets monthly or quarterly, depending on the need. If you're interested, please let us know. So once again, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day, and we hope to talk soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.